The only true sadness that I will ever feel in the world is the fact that I will not live long enough to answer all of my own questions and experience all of those things, because the world is such a fascinating place.
This is Intentionally Ever After. Join intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bukartek for a series of personal conversations and coaching sessions with various people about how living with intention shows up for them.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Intentionally Ever After. Today, I am very excited to chat with my friend, Adam Foley. Adam, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm excited to have the conversation and talk a little bit about intentionality and the facets of it.
Adam, who are you? Will you kindly introduce yourself to folks?
I would be happy to, yes. Obviously, my name is Adam Foley. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I currently serve as the Director of Diversity Education, Assessment, and Outreach in the Office of Institutional Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Delaware.
No big deal.
Yeah, I enjoy it. It gives me a chance to have a lot of very interesting conversations and do a lot of work that I'm passionate about. And I have the opportunity when I'm not doing that to also teach in the departments of Women's and Gender Studies and Human Development and Family Sciences as a bit of an additional task, if you will. So I get time in and out of the classroom on campus, which is always enjoyable.
Yeah, and the reason that our paths crossed originally is you actually were the, I don't know if you were quite the inspiration, but you helped me through my very first ultra marathon. And you escorted me with all your wisdom and in running experience, and that's how we know each other most directly at this point.
Yeah, a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of stubbornness to just keep going even when it hurts, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. So, well, I'm wondering if that might play into some of the discussion that we have a little bit later too around, well, let me just ask you right now, what does it mean for Adam Foley to live intentionally?
I think it does play into that in many ways. And I think there's an element of stubbornness and pushing forward that certainly drives a lot of the work that I do. And so I can use the ultra running marathon metaphors quite profusely in some ways, because I think part of what I've learned over the course of running so many of these long distance races is that there's always a point where the body provides you with that feedback that says, yeah, this hurts, but does it hurt enough to stop? Or is just a cue to say, you can keep going and you can push through that mentally. And so many of these races are mental races. And I think in the same way in other aspects of my life, I've come to start to figure out kind of those points where maybe I might hit a wall and realize that I need to decide if this is actually a wall or if this is just a pause that will allow me to take a step back and think more intentionally about whether I need to go through that wall or figure out a way around it. And so when I'm thinking about intentionality, I'm really thinking about how I lean into my strengths and recognize that there are certainly things that I feel most confident and most comfortable with, and others that I recognize and I probably recognized very early on that just aren't strong suits for me. And a younger me probably would have said, well, I need to improve on those things, right? I mean, it's the classic strengths and weaknesses question that everyone gets asked in interviews, right? And I think we can spend a lot of time trying to improve upon those weaknesses and maybe get ourselves up to 70-80% of proficiency, or just recognize that it's not a strong suit, but rarely do we do things by ourselves. And it's much more common that we are working with and engaging with others. And so if we can surround ourselves with others that bring complementary strengths to the table, then we have a lot more opportunity to succeed and push forward. And so whether that's the person next to you that says, yeah, your knee hurts a little bit, but keep going because it's going to hurt either way, or it's the person that says, yeah, you've hit a bit of a roadblock in your writing process or in trying to come to terms with how to implement a policy, but it needs to happen. So let's figure out how we're going to make that happen and just push forward with it.
That's very interesting. How do you discern when is the situation to pull in someone else, and when is the situation to kind of improve upon that potential weakness?
I think more than anything, like I tend to operate from the standpoint that everything I do is going to involve somebody else in some way, shape, or form. And so rarely am I putting myself in a headspace where I think I need to do this entirely on my own. Now that collaboration may look different, obviously, in different situations, and sometimes it's merely encouragement from a mentor or a colleague, and other times it's true like one-on-one collaboration that's taking place. But I think I'm always kind of taking the stance that if I'm going to set myself to achieving something or accomplishing a task, that it's probably going to involve not just myself, but others in some way. And it's the goal then becomes one of figuring out what that involvement looks like and who I need to tap into, or recognize that maybe I don't necessarily yet have somebody in my tool belt of personalities, as it were, and I need to think more intentionally about who else I can talk to and who I know, and other conversations maybe that I just haven't had with them yet that will lead themselves to reveal other strengths and skills that they may have to bring to the table so that we can assist each other.
Is this limited to your professional world, or does it also apply to your personal world?
No, I'd say it does absolutely apply to my personal world as well, right? We'll probably go back to running a lot, but I think about this in the context of running 100 miles, and over the course of 20 to 30 hours, you experience kind of all of the highs and lows of emotion and physical and spiritual and emotional pain that might come up. And you go in with a plan in terms of your pace and what you're going to eat and who you're going to see at which points. But after a certain period of time, like to some degree, all of that might go out the window, and they mean that you're meeting somebody out on the trail that you didn't know before that day. But because of the way things have worked out, like you're going to spend the next 4 hours running side by side with them. And in that span, you're going to help each other to keep putting one foot in front of each other. And so it's the aid that you anticipate and plan for, as well as the being open to the aid and the assistance that you didn't even know you needed until the moment arose. And I think by being open to that possibility and open to the idea that everyone has the potential to come into your life and be a part of it in kind of these unique ways that often can form bonds and connections that last much longer than that. Like you're able to push yourself further and achieve more in your own life in the process.
So it sounds like a big part of the recipe for intentionality for you is that of deliberate human connection and putting yourself with the right types of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we look at kind of the way that society has transformed over the course of the last 50 to 70 years, we've seen a decided shift from much more communal living and communal experiences and connection through social interaction to increased individuality. And you can look at some of the social science research that talks about our increasing independence and time on our own, and the ways in which we've seen declines in social clubs and social interactions. There's a book that's now, I don't know, maybe 30 years old, called Bowling Alone, that looks at uses the metaphor of bowling leagues that existed in the middle of the 20th century as a sign that people were going out and they were forming relationships and community, especially outside of their family and outside of their spouse or their partner. And over time, participation in those has decreased, and we start to see significantly more dependence on one person for all of our emotional and physical needs, right? Which is in some ways a recipe for potential problems, right? Because no one person can be everything to everyone, but if we don't branch out and seek relationships in different spaces and keep ourselves open to those relationships, then all of a sudden something unexpected happens, and God forbid we lose that person, right? And now we don't know what to do with our lives, right? Which is why you see increasing numbers of older, especially white men, that have lost their partners and all of a sudden are struggling even more with depression because they didn't take care of any of that, right? They weren't the social conduit. They weren't the glue that held friendships together. And they had a partner that was doing all of that. And now they don't even remember how to make friends anymore and make those social connections. And so they're becoming increasingly isolated. And that isolation is then turning to all kinds of different internet discussions that are taking place. And so you can draw, I think, a direct link between that isolation and some of the more extreme political and social views that we're seeing manifested right now online and unfortunately in person, in physical space as well.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting, I hadn't made that connection before. But it sounds like, the phenomenon is almost like they're fostering a single point of failure in this person. And it's kind of depressing to think about. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Right. But it also means that in recognizing that, right, like we as a society have the potential to say, okay, then we need to double down and get back to creating these spaces for social interaction and encouraging that sort of participation at an early age. And obviously that's going to look a lot different now than it did 70 years ago. And I'm not under any false idea that all of a sudden bowling is going to come back into vogue. No offense to the bowlers out there, of course.
No, maybe it will. Why would it not? Right, as a result of this conversation.
Yeah, you never know, right? This could be the catalyst for the bowling boom of 2021. But I mean, with advances in technology and access, like we have more opportunities to leverage actual social interaction, but we need, I think, to think differently about what that looks like and how we utilize these technologies. And so there's, I think, a lot of untapped potential in terms of how we communicate and how we have the ability to communicate with one another to form deep, meaningful relationships that can lead to the types of connections that can assist people and certainly have a link to increases in health outcomes and psychological and mental health and those sorts of things as well.
So is the fix, so to speak, a collection of deep, meaningful relationships, or is it simply a variety of different types of relationships?
I think it's probably both, right? I mean, I think it's not necessarily realistic or even necessary that every relationship we have is deep and meaningful and lifelong. But at the same time, if we're not open to that, to the potential, and so if we're not entering a situation as we encounter somebody new that piques our interest and considering the possibility that they may have that role to play in our lives, then we're missing out. And if that doesn't happen, but we still form the opportunity to have those casual acquaintances and people that we can connect with, and maybe we're just bonding on a particular issue, then that's totally fine. But there's an element of opening ourselves up to that possibility that I think is really important. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of people, and I'll put myself in that box as well, because it means you have to be vulnerable. And the question of vulnerability is a tough one, because everything that we learn and everything that we encounter in society tells us that we can't be vulnerable, right? That we need to put up this armor that protects us from possibly getting hurt. But if we're not open to the possibility of getting hurt, then we're not opening ourselves up to the possibility of having somebody care for us and caring for somebody else as well.
Right. It's like you're not opening yourself up to being able to connect deeply, but it seems like you have to. How about the interplay between vulnerability and trust?
Yeah, it's an interesting back and forth, right? In some ways, it's almost a chicken or the egg scenario, right? Like, do you have to be vulnerable in order to form trust, or do you trust someone and become vulnerable as a result of that, right? But what constitutes trust? And I think that looks different for different people. And to some degree, perhaps there's this idea that, all right, if I'm going to trust you, then I need to be thinking about what I know about you and what I've seen of your public persona and your interactions with other people. But as we know, and you can look to any corner of the political spectrum and see examples of trust being violated, unfortunately, right? Because there's what we see and what we hear publicly, but then there's what's happening behind the scenes. And you don't have the opportunity to see what's happening behind the scenes unless you are vulnerable and you open yourself up to connecting with someone more deeply. So I think they tend to happen in tandem, almost organically, as we form more relationships. But we have to prepare ourselves for the possibility that, yes, that relationship won't go anywhere, or that connection won't happen, and ensure that is not then seen as a failure on our part, as somehow we didn't do enough or didn't care enough. But in fact, that's just the nature of human interaction, and that's always going to happen, right? And that's true. Yeah. That's true of romantic relationships, just as it's true of friendships and other sorts of connections that we have with people. It may not be realistic to think that we're going to form these deep, long-lasting, lifelong connections with everyone that we meet, but we need to be open to that, and also to the reality that sometimes that's not going to happen. And you just have some people that you ride the train with for a certain period of time, but they may get off at a stop and you keep going, and you have other people that are going to ride the rails with you from end to end, and they're meant to be a part of your life for a much longer period of time.
I'm curious about Adam Foley and how he engages with personal interactions. Does he engage with a general openness to see what this person might provide in his life, or is it he has a list of things that he's looking for, and so his radar is open to those types of relationships?
I'd say I'm probably more open to seeing what comes, right? I think I try to live with a genuine curiosity for who somebody is and what their story is, because I just enjoy hearing that story and learning about that person. And I think each person has so much to offer and to provide, even just in their own lived experiences, that they don't necessarily often get a chance to share and to talk about. And we tend to be perhaps too guarded when it comes to sharing some of those pieces, because we don't want to get too personal too quick. And if anything, I've probably found myself on the side of getting too personal too quick, and I don't censor myself as much as I should, at least in terms of professional expectations, and sometimes that may get me in trouble, and if I'm speaking my mind a little bit too freely, regardless of the audience. But I tend to find it exhausting to try and present a certain persona in one space and a different persona in another space. And so I think it's not only more genuine, but it's just healthier to just be who I am. And you're gonna get me the same way, whether we're having a professional conversation or I'm meeting you on the trail to pick up and run for a few miles, because it's easier and less mentally taxing to try and be different things to different people.
Yeah, it certainly seems simpler to approach it that way, right? This is me. This is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Do you catch yourself not doing that on occasion? And if you do, what brings you back to it?
Oh, absolutely. Right. I'd say particularly within professional spaces. And I've thought a lot and to some degree maybe struggled a little bit with kind of the ideas of traditional professional expectations with regard to persona, with regard to communication, with regard to, even things as simple as dress, and what happens as your level of expertise and your level of leadership and supervision increases, that there's this idea that you have to fit a particular mold, which is ironic in some ways, considering I work in higher education, where we're trying to convey to students that we want them to be themselves and find what they're passionate about. But I think as people advance, sometimes the pressure is pretty high to conform in a certain way to expectations about how to act in a position or how to perform in a certain way. And I think it can inhibit genuineness, and it can inhibit the ability to be vulnerable, because you're told that it's not going to be rewarded. And so I've thought a lot about that, especially as my career has progressed, about the pressures to be in a certain way that doesn't feel genuine to who I am, just as a way to fit a mold of what somebody thinks they should expect for someone in this position, right? And certainly there's elements of having to balance personal beliefs with institutional expectations, right? And I have a set of personal and theoretical approaches to my work that work for me individually, but I'm also very well aware of the fact that I'm a representative of a larger institution, which has other concerns and considerations beyond the scope of me as an individual. And so there's a balancing act there. But I think as much as I can, I continue to kind of stumble into figuring that out for myself, and where I continue to have the opportunity to be genuine and true to who I am. And I think I always recognize when I do that and what that means for my ability to be effective in my work and to be productive, and to get back to our relationship conversation, to form more genuine and more meaningful relationships with other individuals that I connect with.
Do you believe you can have it all? Like this balancing act between the institutional expectations or perceived expectations and your own personal approach to things? Does it feel like it has to be a compromise at a certain level, or do you truly believe you can have it all?
I'd like to think you can have it all. I'm not naive enough, perhaps, to be 100% certain of that. I think it certainly depends on the institution you're at, the workplace that you're at. I'm also very well aware of the privilege that I have as a white, cisgendered, heterosexual male in not just the field of higher education, but in society as a whole, and what that means for my flexibility and ability to be genuine in that way, because I can do things and say things and get away with things that other colleagues more often cannot, in order to be perceived as still being professional or proper in some way. But I'd like to think that the space is there, and as I move further along in my own career and potentially move up in terms of leadership potential and scope and whatnot, have the ability then to kind of set that example for others in terms of genuineness, to encourage that with the people that I surround myself with. And so I think we as a collective whole have the ability to do that, but it involves investment on the part of others within your kind of sphere of contact and influence.
For sure, right? We do what we can do at an individual level, but at a certain point for sustainable or systemic change, at least one other will have to jump on board, seemingly, right?
Yeah.
So back to personally, what is one change in habit that for you has had an exponential payoff?
Well, at the risk of being a broken record, like the decision I made to start running in my personal life, which was now maybe 12, 13 years ago, had, I think, a profound impact on so many different aspects of my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. I mean, when I downloaded that early Couch to 5K podcast with the wonderful techno beats that you were supposed to match your pace to as you were going, it was kind of on a whim, in a recognition that I needed to make some changes in my physical health. And I wouldn't say that I loved it initially. I didn't hate it either. I was kind of ambivalent to it at the time. But as I progressed and found that I was able to keep doing it, and it allowed me to make personal connections and form friendships and relationships that blossomed into work partnerships, that blossomed into lifelong friendships, that created a space for changes in many other habits in my life, and gave me an opportunity to find balance and find structure in a way that I don't know that I had found before. And I had at that, up until that point, definitely been a workaholic. And at the time that I picked up running, I was working 70, 80 hours a week, as well as taking a full load of graduate courses and teaching a few courses at the same time. And it wasn't sustainable. And I probably knew that logically, but there was a pressure to succeed. There was a pressure to impress. And I was early enough in my career that I didn't see another option. And I worried probably too much about what others thought of me and my ability to succeed. And so finding running gave me an outlet and an opportunity to not have to think about any of that, to find myself in a space where the only thing that I had to do, and in that moment, and the only person I had to be, was someone who put one foot in front of the other and could just immerse himself in that experience. And so that ability to disconnect and find something personally that I was passionate about, I think gave me more energy and more motivation to find other things that I was passionate about professionally. It ended up, I think, leading to a bit of a shift in my career trajectory, and gave me a sense of clarity in terms of where I wanted to take my life professionally and personally. And it continues to, I think, guide a lot of those decisions that I make.
Yeah, that's where I was curious about next, because obviously it helped you in that pretty key transition for you, right? That stage you were at where things were feeling very intense, and obviously it helped you through that. It seemingly you are out of that specific particular transition and on the other side of it. What does your habit look like today, and kind of a little more about what it does for you?
I think it's continued to provide structure, but also more than anything, given me the space to realize that I can push myself outside of my comfort zone. I think about the running experiences that I've had that have been the most rewarding. It's been those moments where I've said, well, I've never tried this before, but I'm going to try it now. And it may be horrible and it may be an utter failure, but I'm not going to know that until I give it a go. And that has led to some of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And I think that has given me the motivation and the clarity to be able to take some of those same chances in my professional life. And I've never been someone that felt comfortable focusing on one very small particular subject area in their work. And that's part of the reason that I realized very quickly that I was not cut out to be a full-time faculty member, because I couldn't envision myself taking one small area of research and spending the next 30 years looking at just that. And I've always had far more diverse interests, and it's, I think, allowed me to dig deeper into those diverse interests and look for ways in which they connect to one another in a much more interdisciplinary sort of way. And so if I was to list out all of the interests and all of the opportunities for teaching and for research and whatnot, to a lot of people, it would look very scattered, and it would look like, wow, like he just can't focus on anything. But I take a step back from that and I see all of these connections, right? Like I see how a conversation about gender identity is connected to a conversation about racism, is connected to models of leadership development that we explore, that is connected to mental and physical well-being in professional settings, and how that influences policy, and how that could then be connected back to the way in which you put together a syllabus for a course and talk about attendance and talk about grading. And it's the opportunity to make those connections and share those connections with other people, I think that continues to motivate me now. And I think that the opportunities to push myself further in my running has continued to motivate me to ask some of those same questions in my professional life. I'm like, well, I haven't done this before, but I'm curious and I really want to know what it feels like or what would happen. And the only way to do that is to try it, right? So much in the same way that I've never run 200 miles before, but I'm really curious and I want to know what my body would do with that, and how sleep would happen and all of that. And it's maybe a little terrifying, but at some point, like I need to try, right?
Which sounds absolutely absurd, I'm sure, to the average listener of this podcast. And I'm realizing there's been a couple snippets of context. Could you provide some context as to what kind of mileage you're running on the regular and what kind of engagement with running as far as measurement?
Sure. So in terms of mileage, like probably anywhere from 60 to 100 miles a week. And I'm typically training for, as a big goal race, some form of a 100-mile trail race. So spending 20 to 30 hours in the woods on your feet nonstop without sleeping, which is motivating and challenging in all sorts of interesting ways. But at a certain point, like the body can only hurt so much, and then it just becomes a mental game, and it's as much a mental challenge as anything else to keep telling yourself that, well, you can keep going. Like it's gonna hurt whether you stop or you move, and so you might as well move towards the finish line and keep pushing it. And so that tends to be kind of the pattern that I'm in right now in terms of maintaining that running. So yes, it's a very niche corner of the sport, although ultra running in general, so any race over 26.2 miles typically starts at the 50K mark. Ultra running has grown incredibly in the last 10 years. I was just reading, I think the last set of data, there was close to 500,000 people that had completed some form of an ultra marathon in last year. So it's growing, but it's still very much a niche corner of the sport, kind of that ultra endurance category.
Yeah. Well, it certainly gives you your sense of variety that you seek in other areas, seemingly.
Yes, very much so. Yep. Every race is different. Every location is different. It's a great excuse to travel. Like there's very little in terms of upfront expectations, because you can't judge how you're going to do in the next race based on how you did in the last race, because the terrain and the environment and the weather is going to be so completely different. That there's a freedom in that, like going in and just saying, all right, I'm going to see what the day gives me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's exciting. What have you said no to that has made a significant impact in your life?
I was thinking about this, and at the risk of maybe being a little personal, the first thing that came up was thinking back to my first marriage. I'm divorced and remarried and very happy and amazingly in love with my current partner. But I got married the first time very young, college, and it was a college relationship that was probably based more on context and environment than actual connection per se. And it reached a point where we were struggling, and I was uncertain of whether it was a viable relationship. And she very much wanted to pursue extended counseling to try and figure it out. And I realized as we were having these conversations that there were actually some very deep ideological differences that we had that weren't going to change, right? I knew that she was very committed to her beliefs, and I knew that I was very committed to my beliefs, and that to me made it a bit of a kind of a non-starter. And so in my mind, all of the counseling in the world isn't going to change the fact that she believes one thing and I believe another thing, and that has profound implications for our ability to be together. And so my saying no to that extended counseling and saying I think this needs to be it, and we need to separate, was without a doubt one of the hardest decisions that I've ever made in my life. But looking back on that now, I recognize that as a turning point in my own approach to how I live my life. And I had spent a great deal of time up until that point being a people pleaser and doing as much as I could to kind of read the room and figure out what others expected of me and what they wanted from me, and doing that, right? And so especially in the Midwest, like it was very natural to get married, and you were going to raise a family, and you were going to do these sorts of things. And I'd always kind of just assumed, well, that's what I had to do. But it was never because I was interested in it per se. It was because that was the way it was. Yep. And so that moment really kind of served as a turning point where I think I realized that I could make decisions for myself, and people aren't always going to like them and aren't always going to be happy with them, but if I'm not making decisions that are going to allow me to be happy with myself and who I am, then I can't expect others to want to connect with me, and I can't expect others to want to form meaningful relationships with me either, right? And so I don't think we can be happy with somebody else if we're not first happy with ourselves and feel content with our own lives and our own decisions that we've made. So that was, I think, probably a pretty big no in my life, as it were.
Sounds very significant to give you that experience that you can pull from at any given moment to reflect. Yeah, I can make a decision that's different than other people, and have it benefit me and have it make sense for me.
Yeah.
Who is someone you admire, and what do you admire about them?
I think the first person that probably comes to mind is my father. When I think about my approach to the world, my curiosity in the world, and desire to know just in general about so many different things, I really trace it back to the way in which he subtly guided me and pushed me in that direction. I always remember and still go back to his response to pretty much any question I ever had, which was, go look it up. And that really kind of put me in the mindset that I think has driven so much of my life, because I genuinely am curious and want to know about so many different things, and find so many different areas and topics and ideas and people and places fascinating. And I feel like the only like true sadness that I will ever feel in the world is the fact that I will not live long enough to answer all of my own questions and experience all of those things, because the world is such a fascinating place. But that came in large part from him, from his own curiosity, and watching the way that he genuinely engaged with the world. He spent his early years as a reporter and worked as a reporter in the Carter White House, and then went to some more local journalism. And I saw that as an example of how to engage in the world, how to be present, how to understand the importance of knowing what's happening in the world. And doing that, I think, allowed me, especially in the social justice spaces that I occupy now, to recognize how much we don't know and how much we haven't been taught and we haven't had access to. And so I see a lot of my work now as being the act of helping others uncover the pieces of knowledge that they were denied, or that was hidden from them early on. Because so often, once people actually know the full truth of what has happened or what's been discussed or whatnot, you don't have to try and change their mind, because people have the ability to think logically and critically if given the opportunity. They just need all the facts, and we have spent a lot of time denying people all of the facts. And so I trace a lot of that back to my father.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What do you imagine some people admire about you?
I hope more than anything that it's a sense of commitment, that they feel as though if I agree to do something or agree to engage, or even just to sit down with them and have coffee, right, that I'm 100% there, and that they have 100% of my attention, and that I am fully committed to whatever it is that we agreed or that we discussed we were going to do, and that I'm not distracted, or if I am, I'm going to acknowledge that and communicate that. But I, as much as I can, try and try and demonstrate that commitment is there, because I think we so often get partial attention and partial engagement from people, and we feel that, right? And we get a sense that there is no commitment from them to be present, and that doesn't mean there's a commitment to change or to explicitly do anything, but just to be present, to be in the moment, to not be distracted, I think is so powerful, and it leads to the types of relationships that we were talking about earlier. But I just think that it's something that I hope to feel from others, and so I want to communicate myself in terms of my own actions.
What do you do to ensure that you are available to be present?
I think a lot of it is being realistic about time, being realistic about resources, about commitments, and I'll be the first to admit that I probably overcommit myself quite a bit. Which then means I'm spending more time than I probably should working on different things and the like. But I've definitely been working more diligently, probably in the last 5 to 10 years, to be much more realistic about what I am capable of, and feeling okay about that, feeling comfortable in my own kind of professional skin, personal skin, so to speak. And I think if we take the time to be realistic about what's possible, and don't, or at least mitigate some of the fear that comes with saying, well, I don't have time for that right now, or I just don't think that's going to be possible, and I have these other things going on, but I'm interested and I want to. And so let's talk about when that can happen, right? I think if we can do that, it becomes much easier to be transparent with the ability to commit. And that's hard, especially in professional spaces where there are expectations and there are individuals that will push your boundaries and will expect things of you that you do not think are realistic. And so to kind of hold your ground there and convey a sense of what is possible and what is not possible can be really powerful.
So being aware of your own boundaries and being able to provide a qualified no, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds like that takes practice.
I think it takes a lot of practice. I think it's something I'm still practicing quite a bit as transitions happen, and I work with new people. I think a lot of it becomes easier as we get to know people better, though, and we form more relationships, right? Like I'm much more likely to feel confident being able to give that qualified no to you if we've talked, we've interacted, like we've formed a connection, as opposed to someone that I don't know anymore or haven't met yet or is reaching out for the first time. And there's also then a sense that you're not going to make everyone happy, right? And some people are going to be frustrated no matter what. And I can never fully know all that you are bringing to the table when we interact, right? I can't know what's going on in your life. I can't know your personal history. I can't know about the fact that you had to be up at 5 a.m. because you had a sick child or a sick pet. I can't know if you had a fight with your spouse the night before, but we all bring that with us to those moments, right? And so recognizing that and giving ourselves and others grace in that process to know that sometimes we don't even recognize that it's impacting us. But that doesn't mean it's not impacting us. And so I think remembering that is incredibly important.
Well, that was a really amazing takeaway. Are there any other nuggets of wisdom, experiences, or thoughts on intentionality or truly whatever that you'd like to share?
One of the things that has come to mind, and I've been thinking about this a lot myself lately is how we find the mental models for ourselves that allow us to process information and make connections between the different things that we're doing. And there are a lot of mental models out there for looking at how to process information, and plenty of people have written about them. But I think remembering that all of the things that we do are connected, right? Even though they don't necessarily, maybe at face value, seem as though they are, they're connected. And the more that we can look for those connections and acknowledge those connections and honor those connections, I think we can be more successful in our own lives. And success looks obviously different to different people, but ultimately, like we're looking for a version of happiness for ourselves that allows us to see the ways in which all of these pieces are related, because there isn't, and I think we often get lulled into thinking that there's a work life and there's a home life and there's a spiritual life and there's an intellectual life. Like those aren't distinct, I don't think, right? You can't separate them from one another. And once we start to make those connections, we then also open ourselves up to the opportunity to take the strength in one space that we might have, the skills, the experiences, and leverage those in other areas that we wouldn't necessarily have thought to connect them with. And I think being able to leverage those skills and those experiences that we all bring to the table opens up a lot more possibilities for us in terms of what we can achieve and how we can form meaningful relationships with each other.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent thought, perhaps to close us out on. And now I think the other thing you addressed is maybe some wonderings that people have had is, how could you run with someone for 4+ hours? And, what do you even talk about? I think people can get a pretty good indicator that you and I can go for a while on any number of these topics and their interrelatedness. So
absolutely.
I want to thank you for taking the time and intentionally joining me today to share all your nuggets.
You are most welcome. It has been a pleasure. I'm always happy to chat.
This has been Intentionally Ever After, hosted by intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bukartek. If you would like to have your own intentional conversation with Joe on or off the air, visit intentionallyeverafter.com. Thanks for listening.